Every member of the Senate stands in the well of the Senate when they are elected, takes an oath of office. That oath of office, required by the Constitution, is our statement to not only the people we represent, but to the nation, that we will uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. Article 2, Section 2 of that Constitution empowers the President, and those powers include the President's power to fill vacancies on the Supreme Court. It's not permissive language. The word shall can be found in this paragraph. And it basically says that the President of the United States shall nominate, and by and with advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint judges of the Supreme Court. For the first time in the history of the United States of America, the Senate Republicans are prepared to defy this clear statement of the United States Constitution. What an irony that filling the vacancy on the court by the untimely death of Anton Scalia, filling the vacancy on the court of a man who prided himself throughout his judicial career of being what he termed an originalist, sticking to the strict letter of the law as spelled out in the Constitution, that in filling that vacancy, the Senate Republicans have basically decided to reach a new low. In fact, to make history in a very sad way. A seat on the U.S. Supreme Court lies vacant because of the death of Justice Scalia. The President has the constitutional obligation, as I've read, to name a nominee to fill that vacancy. And Senate Republicans are now saying they won't even hold a hearing on that nominee. If the President sends a name, and he will, to the Senate to fill that vacancy, they have said they will not hold a hearing, they will not schedule a vote, and listen to this, yesterday, Senator McConnell said, I will not even meet with that person. This is a new low. Since the Senate Judiciary Committee started holding hearings on Supreme Court nominees a century ago, the Senate of the United States of America has never denied a hearing to a pending Supreme Court nominee. It has never happened. But that's what Senate Republicans are saying they will do. This level of obstruction, of ignoring the clear language of the Constitution, is unprecedented, and it is dangerous. This goes beyond any single vote for any Supreme Court nominee. This is an abdication of the Senate's responsibility under Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution to provide advice and consent on Supreme Court nominations which the President shall appoint, shall nominate. Senate Republicans want to keep the Supreme Court vacant for more than 1 year. They want this vacancy to continue for more than 1 year. That will encompass 2 terms of the Supreme Court. This is demeaning to the institution of the Supreme Court, unfair to millions of Americans who rely on that court to resolve important legal questions. In the coming days, the President will name a nominee as the Constitution requires. Senate Republicans should meet their responsibility under the Constitution. Senate Republicans should do their job and give the President's nominee a fair hearing and a vote. Yesterday, the Republican members of the Senate Judiciary Committee sent a letter to the Majority Leader, and here's what they said, quote, "This committee will not hold hearings on any Supreme Court nominee until after our next president is sworn in on January 20th, 2017, end of quote. Why did they take this unusual position in defiance of the Constitution? Quote, "The presidential election is well underway. Americans have already begun to cast their votes. The American people are presented with an exceedingly rare opportunity to decide in a very real and concrete way the direction the court will take over the next generation," end of quote. That argument is specious. The American people have already voted. They voted to elect our president, Barack Obama, and they voted to elect 100 senators who currently serve in this body. President Obama was elected to a 4-year term, and 11 months remain. The American people voted for each of us to do our jobs for as long as we serve in office. By a margin of 5 million votes, the American people have chosen a president. Did they elect a president for 3 years? Or 3 years and 2 months? No, they elected a president for 4 years. And this president's term continues until January the 20th of 2017. The Republicans conveniently ignore the obvious. The will of the American people was expressed in that election, and the election of Barack Obama as President of the United States empowers him, under the Constitution, to fill this appointment, fill this vacancy with an appointment. They didn't vote in that election for us to sit on our hands for over a year while the Supreme Court twists in the wind, and while the Republican senators pray every night that President Donald Trump will somehow give America a different Supreme Court nominee. And not a single American, incidentally, has yet cast a vote for President of the United States, not one, in the next election, despite the statement of the Senate Judiciary Committee letter that says otherwise. It is February, and this year, the nomination conventions are scheduled for late July. The modern Supreme Court confirmation process has taken an average of 67 days. There is more than adequate time to hold a hearing on this nominee and get this done properly. All we need is for the Senate Republicans to do their job. Yesterday on the Senate floor, I urged my Republican colleagues not to duck a vote on the president's nominee. They can vote yes, they can vote no, but they shouldn't abdicate their constitutional responsibility for a political advantage. I'm amazed that my Republican colleagues now say they not only want to duck that vote, they also want to avoid even having a hearing on the nominee. And they're afraid to even meet with this nominee for fear that maybe they might think it's a good nominee. Even more shockingly, the Republican leader and several Republican members of the Judiciary Committee said yesterday they would not even meet with the president's nominee. I heard one of our colleagues in the Senate last night on television when asked pointedly and directly, if the president nominates someone from your state to the Supreme Court vacancy, are you saying you wouldn't meet with that person? My colleague on the other side of the aisle ducked the question. This is stunning. Remember, the president is obligated by Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution to send a nominee to the Senate. That is the process the Founding Fathers established. That is the president's responsibility. How can the Senate Republicans refuse to even meet with the person selected under that constitutional process? How is that being faithful to the terms of that Constitution? How are the Senate Republicans upholding and defending this Constitution by this evasive, historically unprecedented action? Sadly, it appears that Senate Republicans have calculated that it's in their political best interest to keep the president's nominee out of the spotlight. They are hoping that with this letter from the Senate Judiciary Committee, and by saying yesterday we'll have nothing to do with it, they're going to turn out the lights on this issue. That's not what's going to happen. This issue is going to be there and remembered, and it's going to be recalled on the floor of the Senate repeatedly. They thought they could close down the government when Senator Cruz of Texas sat here for I don't know how many hours reading Dr. Seuss while we shut down the government, and they thought people would forget Senator Cruz shutting down the government. They didn't. And he is finding on this campaign trail that a lot of people have remembered that. Well, the American people are not going to forget what the Senate Republicans are trying to do with the Supreme Court. I've served on the Senate Judiciary Committee for the hearings and confirmation votes of 4 of the 8 sitting Supreme Court justices. Let me state clearly that this senator is more than happy to meet with the president's Supreme Court nominee, as I have with all nominees, Republican and Democrat alike. And I will consider that nominee on the merits, as I've always tried to do in the past. Yesterday, Senate Republicans also tried to deflect attention from their unprecedented obstruction by pointing to quotes from some Democrats years ago. But the record's clear. Democrats have never blocked a Supreme Court nominee from having a hearing. Republicans are breaking new ground with this obstructionism. The American people deserve better. The bottom line, there's no excuse for the Senate to fail to do its job. Once the president has named his nominee, the Senate must give that nominee a fair hearing and a timely vote. If the Constitution means anything to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they understand. What they are doing is unprecedented. It has never happened once in American history. We are now finding the obstructionism of Senate Republicans reaching a new low. They are ignoring the clear wording of our Constitution, which they have sworn to uphold and defend, and they are obstructing in a way that we have never seen before in the history of the United States. That is the reality, a reality that will not be lost on the American people.